Chapter 1, He Who is Lucky is Lucky. Medor, the first attempt. So, I returned from Sakhalin and began to think about what to do next. With my old friend Alexei Kokorin, we almost immediately decided to open an advertising agency, and why not? It was the end of 2005. We registered i.e. Krutko, and off we went. We rented a modest office at the station, Komsomolskaya, put up a sign, Medor. The name, Medor, by the way, was invented by my ex-wife. Yes, I also had time to get married. The idea was that employees, like bees, bring honey to the hive, each contributing his or her own. This is about the first syllable, and the second, or, in translation from Spanish, gold, actually oro, but now it does not matter. That is, according to the idea, each employee brings his or her own value to our common hive. The business plan back then was to supply promoters for various promotional events. Employees worked for $6.60 an hour, of which the promoter got 6 and the cents were left to us, the organizers, all fair and square. It's exactly the opposite of the predatory pay option I previously had to go through myself. I didn't want people who came to work for me to consider themselves cheated. So, rented an office, set up a sign, and I began to call potential customers, offering our services. But the happiness did not last long. We worked like that for only 3 or 4 months. It was good that at least we didn't hire a lawyer and an accountant. Alexei already had some experience in business, video rental, pharmacy and other things. I was counting on his skills. However, it was at that time that he had a child, and our companion could not do our business. He simply did not have time. Therefore, it turned out so that at the beginning of the business money, we equally discounted, but, one person in the office from morning to night was working hard, the telephone receiver was sticking to his ears, and the other, let's say, participated in the process much less. At the same time, we planned to divide the modest profit in half, but it did not happen. The business model, if it can be called such at all, did not work, and instead of income, losses began. I suggested to Alexei that we end the joint venture. We invested about $12,000 of our personal savings each in the first version of Medor. In the end, all that money disappeared, plus I was left owing something. It was frustrating as hell. With tears in my eyes I took the nameplate off the office door, as if in some Hollywood movie. But life is life, you have to move on. Klava, I'm not your lover. After my own business failed, I got a job at the newspaper Extra M. It was a publication where almost all the space was taken up by advertising. Yes, in the 90s and part of the noughties even such a topic was quite in demand. The job seemed dust-free. It was necessary to attract clients to publish their advertising. It seemed not particularly difficult. I already more or less knew how to call. Problems, however, appeared almost immediately. It turned out that the declared 3 million circulation of the newspaper in reality was much less. And the distribution was not organized as perfectly as the management claimed. Customers called and complained that the newspaper arrived late and was not delivered to everyone. I had to blush and throw up my hands. As I realize now, the structure of that company was wrong. Such a model cannot be effective in principle. Well, tell me, what can happen when managers occupy only half of one floor, the other half is the accounting department, and the management sits on 3 floors? In simple terms, it's called 1 plowman for 1 plowman, 7 eaters. The eaters have much higher salaries. If the manager works for $650, salary plus interest, the management gets $6,500 to 10 times more. And yes, I got into a company that was basically living out its century. No one there wanted to think about development. For example, when Yandex with its contextual advertising first appeared on the market, it actively advertised in newspapers. Yandex, everything can be found, remember their slogan? And Extra M, by printing this advertising on the front page, was essentially guiding its own clients into the clutches of the strongest competitors of the new wave. Plus, there was a kind of hazing in the company. So, at this point you might think that the author of these lines is complaining too much. But believe me, dear reader, with all my military training experience, know how to withstand pressure. All this information is just for the sake of completeness, so that it is clear what I had to go through. So, we, the newly hired managers, were sitting on cold calls, only doing what we were doing to attract potential clients. And the guard of old managers were in fact resting. When an employee quit, his clients were distributed among the old-timers. New incoming requests were transferred only to long-time managers. A newcomer had to work for a long time to be accepted into the system and shared with warm clients. And at one point, I think I was ready to be elevated to the rank of old-timers. But blah blah blah, that wasn't the reception I was expecting. Anyway, at some point the author of this book was attracted to the head of the sales department, let's call her name Clavdia. A pleasant woman in general, older than me by 5 to 7 years, she began to openly give me unambiguous signs of attention. In violation of all written and unwritten laws of communication, flirted young lady in full view of the entire team. There began giggles and giggles from the colleagues. With a personal life I had everything perfectly, about what at one point and told the boss directly. Probably, her further behavior was due to resentment that I did not reciprocate. But at the same time, I still had to earn a living somehow, I had to work energetically. It is difficult for a manager to take on a new client who has been advertising his services on the market for a long time. Why? The simple fact is that he is either already in the newspaper, or has tried to be placed and it didn't work, or is assigned to an old manager who works with the client. That is, I, and others like me, had the task of finding new customers for the Moscow market. One day I read in Vedomosti that the Urals Bank Severnaya Kazna was planning to enter the Moscow market. I called them, directly to Ekaterinburg, and offered them an advertising space in our newspaper, since they had decided to conquer the capital. During the conversation, I learned that the deputy chairman of the board and the president of the bank would soon be flying to the capital, and I arranged a meeting with them. We saw each other, negotiated the terms and hit the ground running. We will advertise the bank on a whole page. Colleagues were surprised, wow, a relatively new manager caught such a big fish. The typical size of an advertising module is 12 a matchbox, modules the size of a cigarette packet were an event. The newspaper contained only 32 pages, printed pages, and the fact that one whole ad came from a new client was a special event. But, the bank didn't get the expected output from the ad. For several reasons, the mismatch of the bank's target audience with the advertising medium, the above-mentioned quality of distribution, and in addition Extra M divided Moscow into two parts, north and south. It is as if, for example, if you put a ruler to the map of the capital, from Krlatsko to Shelkovskaya, you get a northern zone of coverage. It is approximately the same in the south. Accordingly, newspapers with advertisements were distributed only in these areas, and the bank's branch opened right in the center, at Tolskaya. That is, there were a lot of advertising contacts, but the actual penetration of potential clients is not high. People want the bank to be close by. In parallel with my activities in the field of attracting clients, the company continued intrigues at the level of Game of Thrones. The aforementioned Klava, as the head of the department, had access to the entire client base. She took advantage of her position and secretly offered this client more favorable terms of cooperation, which I, an ordinary manager, could not promise. Simply put, she tried to appropriate a particular customer and the associated laurels for herself. And here I am, talking to Severnaya Kazna, and suddenly I learn that they have approved new publications in the same Extra, although it has never given them a significant return before. And that the negotiations go directly through the head of the department. Klava, when I asked her, how did this happen? She replied that the company had to develop, and she was the one who ensured that. I see. I quickly organized a meeting with the bank's management, to which we went together. As a result, I offered the client even more favorable conditions for placement in the newspaper Okruga, which was part of our holding, but had a more convenient distribution for the client, by districts, as it is easy to guess, and almost entirely consisted of articles, which was more suitable for the client's format. Thus de facto cancelled the boss's deal, even though the bank was already ready to pay the bill. Why did he do that? Because the most important thing is to keep the customer happy. That's one. And there was another reason, too. It is madness to do the same thing, expecting a different result each time, Albert Einstein's words. Why repeat a similar placement that the client was dissatisfied with? Even if at a lower price. And what is also important, this is third, I am allergic to deceit and dishonesty. I found the client, and Clava wanted to take him out of personal revenge. You can't do that, it's wrong. She, of course, took even more offense and tried first to kick me out of the department, and then to fire me from the company. But, damn it, we don't have to reciprocate any intimate offers, everyone has their own choice. Mixing personal and work is low. Here I formed another, already personal rule, no affairs at work. I couldn't stand it any longer. I turned to the top management and calmly told them this story. I noted that, in my opinion, the head of the department should not try to run over a manager out of resentment. I argued that we come to the office to work and bring money to the company, not to find out who is going to date whom. Well, that's logical, in my worldview, that's the only way it should be. Although the general director was a close friend of Claudia's, she took my side, and that lady was transferred to another department, and we were assigned a new manager. And I got a star in the team, as in a computer game, when the hero receives prizes for winning the battle with the boss. Colleagues perceived it that way, that I failed the boss. Were you proud of yourself? No, I was only happy that I could now work in peace, and no one would be putting sticks in my wheels. Extraordinary people. Around the same time, a strange period in the life of the company began. The commercial directors began to change. One of them, let's call him Athanasius, was directly attacked by all the managers of the old guard. They did not like his policy. He wanted to delve deeply into the work with customers. He wanted to personally meet with customers, get feedback from them on the work of the newspaper staff and on cooperation in general. Now, with 15 years of my own entrepreneurial experience, I realized that a fantasy did everything right. Those managers simply had a natural resistance to reforms. They had been sitting in the same place for 7 to 9 years, doing nothing much to promote themselves and develop the company as a whole. They just picked up the phone when it rang, that's all. That man turned out to be firm, he stuck to his line. The older employees asked me to help them take him out, kind of like an experienced corporate hitman. Being a straightforward person, I told them, if you are so smart, why haven't you become directors yourselves yet, but are sitting in ordinary managers? So you are not that smart, are you? And since your competencies don't stretch to the level of a director, how can you teach him how to do his job? What good is the hard truth spoken to your face? Sometimes it is necessary, but this was clearly not the case. Now it is clear to me that of course it was impossible to answer like that. I took and in one moment made a dozen enemies in an already difficult environment. I didn't agree to dump my boss, and my colleagues took offense, and my relations with them deteriorated. Furthermore, when my son was born, I showed off in the office, shared this joyful news. The nuance is that no one knew that my wife and I were expecting a child. I do not like to talk about plans and expectations, it is better to tell the fact at once. Instead of congratulations, I was bombarded with a barrage of negativity, not only that you refused to participate in the business, but also a son here bragging. In short, they took my joy in spite of themselves. On top of that, I was again underpaid for my Northern Treasury bonuses. Instead of $2,500, or 8% of the turnover for a new customer, I was given only $500. Again a violation of payment agreements. It became clear that the period of my work in extra is coming to an end. Which way to look? At that time I just caught fire with a new idea. There was contextual advertising, begun, from Rambler. If you suddenly do not know, contextual advertising, this is when you write in a search engine some queries, for example, online learning English, and get in addition to the main output ads tied to your query, i.e. advertisers pay for placement on specific words. Yandex Direct then has not yet gained today's momentum, and it seemed that begun can enter the market seriously and for a long time. I received training from them, and then at meetings with clients I told them that it was now possible to reach the target audience from a certain region directly by keyword, rather than buying advertising space in general. Clients wanted a comprehensive approach to advertising and a predictable output. Everything is logical. They liked the newspapers, Extra M and Center Plus, a similar theme, less and less. Right, in such press the promotion was built on the principle, come to me for treatment, both cow and she-wolf, all niches, all directions at once. Business prefers to attract applications from real clients, investing every ruble wisely. It was becoming unprofitable to get involved in a story with unpredictable results of advertising in newspapers. Paper was clearly beginning to lose ground to online. I pondered these processes and questioned whether I should continue working at Extra M because of all this. Anyway, I was so excited by the sale of Runner that I relaxed a bit, and on one day I didn't come to the office. I was running around to clients for a whole day. Colleagues saw my absence as a chance to take revenge for not kneeling, and made a collective act. So, you skipped work, we demand to fire you. On top of that, my sales figures at the time were not the best either. In general, they did not fire me, but instead transferred me to a related position with the wording, "What difference does it make to you what department you work in?" It would have been better if they had fired me. Honestly, it would have saved me some time. I will omit various unimportant details. The point was that it dawned on me, clients in negotiations often wanted to expand the range of services I provided them. Simply put, they wanted to know if they could order, for example, souvenirs as well. An idea arose, to propose to the management to create an advertising agency with a wide range of services on the basis of the newspaper Extra M. The main argument, we already have many loyal customers, and we could offer them not only advertisements in the newspaper, but also outdoor advertising, distribution of leaflets, souvenirs, etc. But I didn't have time to propose this idea. Now I think I just didn't dare to go to the management. And one day I came to the office, and my pass was blocked. Well, good, everything that is done, for the best. The idea of an advertising agency was discussed not with the management of Extra, but with my friend Ilya Akhmedov, another former employee of the newspaper, with whom we had excellent business and personal relations. Can you guess what happened next? $1 million idea? A little about Ilya, a wonderful guy with a bright head, who stood at the origins of our company. He is a goal-oriented, talented and positive superhuman. Ilya came from Omsk, worked as a manager at a newspaper, and in the evenings he worked as a pizza waiter and sold Amway products to everyone he knew. In a word, I was doing as well as I could. Even before my dismissal, almost all of us, the managers of Extra's client relations, were called by the RBC publishing house. They offered us to join them for big money. Ilya agreed, but he worked there for only 2 months, and didn't show much result, since he had a big contract with the Moscow Pledge Bank, which is not a quick process with unpredictable results. But interestingly, Ilya was fired for lack of results, and he continued to work on the deal. He accumulated debts, but still believed in a big client. Akhmedov eventually managed to sell advertising to the bank, but there was a problem: how to make the payment. He had not registered the company at that time. In general, Ilya turned to me, and I shared the contacts of the technical company in trade, which, however, took a hefty percentage of the transaction amount. Cooperation with the bank was successful. They ordered Ilya a website, and then some additional souvenirs. It was becoming quite unprofitable to make payments through InTrade at the increasing turnover. Then we met, discussed the situation and decided to create our own company to make payments and documents through it. That was 2007, my second attempt to make a business. I proposed the same name for our LLC, Medor. I liked it, and there was no desire or time to look for something else. Ilya, a smart and authoritative man, smashed my idea to smithereens. He said, "No one will understand your analogy with the beehive." He said that it all has to be explained and chewed up. And you need the opposite, to say, and immediately everything became clear. In short, he insisted that our agency became known as Idea, gave strong arguments, and I conceded. The decisive was the idea that the agencies with this name is already registered a good dozen and a half. And if we are called the same, there is a possibility that potential clients of other ideas will start calling us. That's when we'll get them. Now, of course, it's funny to remember such a business strategy, but at the time the idea seemed quite reasonable. The heat was on. I worked at home, and my wife and I lived in a one-room apartment in Philly. My son Gordy could ask for food or anything else at any time, crying, of course, and how else do babies communicate? So I had to go out on the balcony with my cell phone so that I could have a normal conversation. In this format, I negotiated, then met in person, sold advertising, traveled to printing houses and so on. I would stand in line with a wad of money and ask for my clients' layouts to be placed in the most favorable places. Then on the day the newspaper was published, I checked whether the phone number was correct, whether the ad was placed in that section. And yes, it happened that, for example, the numbers did not match. If I found a mistake, it meant only one thing: I messed up, and I have to return money to customers. Such a mistake could cost me $1,000 or even $1,500. But I had no choice, responsibility and reputation come first. If everything was in order, I called the customer and asked whether the flow of calls from customers had started. If there were no calls, it meant one thing: I had to change my strategy. At the same time, it was becoming increasingly difficult for everyone to work from home. At some point Ilya persuaded me to go to an office. This guy always dragged our business forward, and we rented a space on Voikovskaya, a room of 18 meters. At this point, I would like to pass the word to my business companion, Vladimir Sokovsky. I will tell you more about this wonderful man, without whom Medor would not have known its current success, a little further on. Vladimir Sokovsky, managing partner of Medor. I rented Oleg his first office. Yes, it was near the Voikovskaya metro station. But no, I'll start with something else. As a fourth-year student, I took my grandfather's car for a drive, wrecked it, and started looking for money for repairs. I called around my friends and found a job as a realtor in an office building. Completely by accident, it turns out. One man rented a large space, an open space, divided it into squares, which he began to rent. In addition to realtor activity, I had to fully organize the painting of walls and flooring, carpeting. And the most difficult thing was to draw up contracts, which I had never worked with before. Among the first 30 clients were two partners, Ilya Akhmedov and Oleg Krutko. Ilya arrived first, a rather respectable Oriental man, in a well-made suit, with an attractive girl, on a beautiful sports car. Having chosen the best and largest office, he said, tentatively, we choose this one. In an hour and a half my partner will come, he will also look at it, and then we will make a final decision. And so, an hour and a half or 2 hours later, comes a guy about 5 years older than me, in crumpled pants, dirty sneakers, with a backpack, wearing a cap. I asked, "Did you bring the mail?" He said, "No, my colleague was looking at the office." I didn't even immediately realize who he was talking about. I looked at Oleg and thought, I wonder how it is with solvency. Everything is clear with the former, but not so much with the latter. He says, no, this one is too big. It must be expensive, we don't need it. So we started looking downward. Eventually he settled on the smallest one. As far as I remember, it was only about 18 square meters. In 2 to 3 days they were already moving in. Of all the clients at the time, they were the most meticulous. Usually tenants looked through the agreement as they now look through the rules of the license agreement, that is, in passing. At best, they looked at the documents of the subtenant who leased the premises, that he was at least alive, could be seen and his passport details matched. And at Oleg's request, we pulled out the contract with the owner, even some additional papers that they would not be deceived. In general, the attitude of these people was as serious as possible. Soon Ilya and I had a slight conflict of interest. I thought we would work together, that is, plow together, invest money and make a profit. But my companion had other plans. So we sat down in some fish restaurant, and Ilya, a terrific negotiator, by the way, said, Listen, let's just rent an office together, pay rent for it, and the money, ahem, well, as if to receive separately. You have your way, I have mine. I say, so we won't be partners, right? Ilya, who has always been a very soft negotiator, replied. Not exactly. We will still be partners. But we will just be a little more independent in our decision-making, in hiring, in personnel management, in strategy. Anyway, he persuaded me to try a new format. Each of us started working with a separate client base, developing our own business model, hiring employees, allocating a payroll, and so on. That is, it turned out to be a kind of collaboration. We work separately, but we share the costs of an accountant, office rent and electricity, like such good neighbors. And yet, despite the strange form of partnership, things were going well. My client base was growing, the number of projects was increasing, it was necessary to expand the staff to delegate responsibilities. I had no time to swing. One day I ran into a guy in the office corridor who was changing the floor covering. He was dragging the carpet back and forth along the corridor. This was future business superman Vladimir Sokovsky. Now he is my reliable partner and executive director in all our business projects. I stopped him and asked him how much he earned. Volodya earned about $900, not bad for those times, but obviously not the limit. At the same time, he performed the duties of the assistant director of the building, as you already know. That is, he dealt with organizational issues, from renting out offices to buying toilet paper, all at once. In general, I urgently needed a sales manager, and, the guy with the carpeting, apparently, smart, why waste time? And I immediately offered him to go to work for me, promising to pay more. I said, give it all up, let's get down to business. I brought Vladimir to our office, which he also rented to us, showed him his workplace, computer and telephone. What else do you need to make money? Vladimir Sokovsky. A month after I rented the office to Oleg and Ilya, my short-term contract was coming to an end. We had only agreed with the employer to rent out what was in the space. I didn't know what I was going to do next yet. There was some business planned with the same business owner. He would take the next space and rent out the next space in installments too, and the next, and the next, and the next, and so on, but he would take a break before doing so. And while I was renting out the remaining offices, literally 5 of them, I was solving small issues with tenants. Someone is cold, someone is hot, someone is not enough light. That's when Oleg offered me a job. About advertising agencies, at that time I knew only what was shown in movies and TV series. This is a place where strange young men with green hair and girls with model looks without end, come up with some creativity. And it has nothing to do with dull everyday life. So I accepted the offer without much thought. I thought it would be about the same here. By the way, Oleg still tells this story, that he supposedly saw me when I was walking down the corridor with a carpet in my hands, and when he heard his offer, he immediately dropped everything and ran after me like a faithful disciple after a prophet. In fact, I saw him almost every day anyway, as I did with all the other tenants. I was always there, solving all sorts of questions that Ilya and Oleg had. How are the rates calculated? Is it realistic to do this or that in the office? Is it possible to make the internet faster, etc.? Some time after their arrival and sounded the offer of work, very tempting. But there were still doubts. Of course, my specialization included advertising and PR, but I doubted that it would help me. I went to talk to my manager at the time, the director of a real estate company. He told me right away, if you quit, I'll cut your salary, give you less money. But if you promise that you will stay and in 2 months you will go to the next project, on the contrary, you will get more. And he and I were almost the same age, a year or 2 apart at most. He was such a puny spectacle-wearing man, because of which even tenants didn't always trust him. So I said, buddy, with that attitude, definitely not. As a result of an hour and a half of negotiations, we came to an agreement. If I rented all the remaining offices in 2 days, I would receive my salary in full. Apparently, I was lucky or I was very tense, but I fulfilled my obligations to my employer on the same day. And that was it. In a day or 2 I already knocked on Oleg's door not as a landlord, but as a potential employee. On the first day, the myth about models and people with colorful hair was dispelled by itself. The office was mentally divided into two parts. Oleg had 3 desks and Ilya and his younger brother had the same number of desks. This is the environment in which my career in the advertising business began. Oleg put some free newspapers in front of me, Extra M, Center Plus, Work for You, took a ruler, a pencil and said, "Well, look, now we'll teach you how it counts and how to sell." I learned that the entire strip is divided into 45 equal parts. That in professional slang different sizes of advertising space are called matchbox, cigarette pack and so on. Learned what you can do, what you cannot and how to calculate on a calculator system of markups and discounts, consistently added and subtracted. After that he gave me an Excel file, which contained about 30 or 40 contacts, with them Oleg had previously dealt with, being an employee of Extra, and when he worked for himself, in the home format of the agency. And he said, "Well, call me, time versus money." We ordered a website, added prices for placement in the newspapers Extra M, Center Plus, and in the magazines of the Delavoymir Publishing House, and gave contextual advertising on the internet leading to our resource. We did not have any clear business strategy, we only developed a system of interaction with clients. It looked like this. When a customer comes to us with a request to advertise a product or service, our agency does not offer him placement in any publication or any other service right off the bat. First we study the company that is interested in promotion. More precisely, we look at what kind of goods/services and at what specific prices it sells. After this analysis, it immediately becomes clear how exactly we can be of maximum use to the client. This is how a commercial offer appears, that's what the customer receives. Practice has shown that in 9 out of 10 cases, customers want to buy not that advertising that actually works for them, and that they like, that works for their neighbor. But the thing is, their potential customers are other people with other needs, and their neighbor has a different business. And this tried and true system of ours was showing amazing sales statistics. 10 calls from potential customers brought us 7 appointments and 7 sales. 5 of them became our regulars. In addition, it should be taken into account that almost all commercial transactions we sold, in a complex, that is, the client bought from us not one advertising direction, but several at once, which reduces the risks of the client, and our profits multiplied. All in the plus. Usually the customer bought 4 to 5 directions. With the minimum cost of placing an advertising block of $450, the total customer paid an average of $2,200 per transaction. People were attracted by the fact that, cooperating with us, they could immediately formalize placement on several sites, rather than calling separately to the managers of each newspaper, spending long hours. The cost of the service, in addition, included the preparation of the layout, that is, we drew the future advertisement ourselves. I did it personally, as well as mopping the floors in the office. At the first stage we did not allocate funds for designers, cleaners, and much more. We did it ourselves, as they say. In general, everyone was happy, and our turnover grew. Vladimir Sikovsky. So, I started calling around. Most of these contacts were small entrepreneurs. Some were selling acrylic bathtub inserts, for grandmothers, others were selling windows, doors, stretch ceilings. There was still a constant string of ads from real estate agencies looking for employees. They were looking for realtors, quite massively, so there were a lot of ads. From the 3rd or 4th day of my work came the first orders and payments. They were quite small, especially by today's standards. And there were few of them, compared to the list that Oleg gave me. Why? It's simple. These same people were constantly getting calls from other companies, young enthusiasts like me. So we literally fought for each client, and on a monthly basis. Even if he has now made a placement through us, it does not mean that he will renew here as well. Newspapers, to be honest, were not very good at that time. Up to the point that in some of them the editorial staff themselves called the ads under the guise of customers to create the illusion that advertising works. And it turns out that the calls are coming, but the real result, 0. Although there were times when the ads did start bringing in clients, but not immediately, but after the second or third prolongation. If we talk in general, the newspapers of that time, a good advertising channel, known to all. At that time only people under the age of 35 were looking for information about the goods they were interested in on the internet, and even then they did not always find it. Whereas the people who made important decisions in large companies were often much older. That is why free newspapers with advertisements in those years were really delivered to every house and entrance. Their circulation at one time really reached 2 to 3 million copies. They were distributed, they were delivered to the entrances. And in principle, with a well-designed module and competently chosen positioning, for example, on a page with a TV program, it gave great results. Especially if the target audience of the product, older people who carefully study this very program. As a result, many entrepreneurs for 2-3 years were placed on the same place and could throw a tantrum if suddenly their ad was on another page. Different things have happened, but it's good enough to learn from the press, that's a fact. Because the cost of a mistake here is not as big as if you lose a large advertising contract. And the amount of communication is large. At my managerial peak in the press, I generally believed that I cooperate with half of Moscow's commercial organizations. And even though I put the same spread in 3 newspapers, that spread consisted of many advertisements, ranging in size from half a matchbox to an entire cigarette packet. In short, the work went on. The staff grew and the system was modernized. Back then, it was like this: a call came in, I picked up the phone, talked to people and identified their needs. Based on the results of the negotiations, I gave orders to the employees, and they, in turn, prepared a commercial proposal and issued invoices. And then I traveled to meetings with clients myself to personally conclude deals. We worked as a single organism, everyone knew their business, so the agency was actively developing and its authority was growing. That's what it means to have the right team. More than once and more than twice I was convinced of what wonderful people came to Medor and how much the success of the whole company depends on the talent of each employee. And how important it is for everyone to be in their place, doing the job that matches their psychotype, professional and communication skills. Alexei Galkin, a former employee of Medor, is the marketing director of the jewelry company at the time of writing. I joined the company as a 4th-year university student. At that time, the agency had only existed for 3 months. I remember finding an advertisement in the newspaper, Work and Salary, in the section, Work for Students. I was invited for an interview. I also expected to see a luxurious office with marble floors, girls of model appearance, everything like in the book, 99 Francs, by Frederick Begbetter. But what awaited me was a room with 3 desks, at which sat a short-cropped man in grinders and a holey t-shirt, who looked like a skinhead, and a senior student like me. Anyway, these people turned out to be Oleg, the director of Medor, and Vladimir, the sales manager at the time. I poke my head into this room and ask, "Is this definitely an advertising agency?" They, yes, Alexei, come in. They started to tell me something, and I was sitting there thinking, it must be some kind of pyramid. In the sense that nothing was clear, but it was very interesting. We talked, and I was hired as the second manager, even though I didn't know how to use a fax machine and didn't even know how to write business letters. However, on the 3rd day Oleg called me into the conference room, i.e. simply into the corridor, and said, "Alexei, you are not suitable for us, because you are very phlegmatic, and we do not need such people. We are looking for more, let's say, quick-witted guys." I was very much hurt by his words. I never considered myself phlegmatic, some kind of gray mouse. And I answered Oleg, "You know what? I'm not going anywhere." He continued to stand his ground. He told me to pack my things, even started to push me. But I wasn't going to give up so easily. At that time, my salary was about $600, not counting the percentage of deals. So I suggested that Oleg deduct $30 from my salary every day until one of 2 things happened: either he would be convinced that I was exactly what he needed, or I would be left with no money at all. That was the deal. A week or a week and a half before the end of my probationary period, one of my deals went off, surprising Oleg, Vladimir, and myself. That is how I earned money and stayed with the company. Yes, the team was growing, and the orders were getting bigger too. Over time, I began to limit myself to phone conversations. I didn't have time to travel around Moscow from meeting to meeting. Of course, because of this, the conversion rate dropped many times over, because it was fundamentally important for many customers to communicate with the performers in person. But nevertheless, the losses were not so great. I realized that my time was still worth more. Now, remembering the early era in the life of the company, I realize how funny and somewhat naive everything looked then. Well, judge for yourself. We would meet clients near a convenient subway station. I simply sat in a customer's car, within 30 to 40 minutes told about advertising opportunities, the cost of incoming calls and their number from this or that advertising channel. And they would give me a cash payment for the advertising. No one even asked me for my passport. Once again, as a rule, everyone was very satisfied with our cooperation. Only 1 out of 10 left without making a deal, the rest stayed with us for a long time. To be fair, I would say that sometimes it happened that some newspaper was not delivered to all the addresses, not distributed to all the declared points. Or simply the layout was unsuccessful, and because of this advertising did not pay for itself. In this case, of course, the client left. Life can be unpredictable, and no one cancelled force majeure, I admit it. But the most interesting thing is that over time we have identified a key trend. If a client, let's say, buys 6 areas of advertising placement, and 3 of them work great, and the rest do not pay off as well as we would like, the company still stays with us. Hence the conclusion: the more diversification by types/directions of advertising at the start of cooperation, the higher the chances that the customer will get the expected result and you will be friends with him for a long time, because it is more likely that the customer will be satisfied. Sell to the client like you sell to yourself. So, our company was gaining momentum. We were in even greater need of workers and bright heads, so we developed a system for hiring new employees, thanks to which only the best of the best joined our staff. It is effective and simple. If a candidate made a good impression, then after a little training, no more than an hour, the applicant was offered to receive 2 incoming calls from real customers. The negotiations should end with a sale of our services, immediately and without a miss. What is especially important, that the potential manager sold not just one service, but the whole complex. If the candidate did not achieve a single sale as a result of the 2 calls, he or she did not pass the test. Alexei Galkin, a former employee of Medor, now marketing director of a jewelry company. In my time, I quickly memorized these rules of the game. The main thing is to try to sell the client not individual services, but complex placements. Not just one direction, but several at once, in order to earn more money. Another rule is to gather as much information about the customer as possible. We have always tried to understand the client's problems and how we can help him in each specific case. For example, if it made sense to buy additional services, leaflets, souvenirs, advertising in the press, we offered them. We tried to make sure that the client came back to us, and more than once. We worked on loyalty so that our cooperation would last for a long time. We had no limitations, in terms of, we work with this client and this client we don't work with. We got involved in any hustle. Even if it was very difficult, we still tried to do something. We didn't know a lot of things, but there was no fear, we just worked. Back then, social networks were not very developed yet, we didn't know what influencer marketing was at all, but we created accounts, posted reviews in groups. We had no idea how to do it properly, we had no experience of it at all. But still we spent our time to figure it out. Fearlessness is our specialty. Vladimir Sokovsky. Lisha and I have always had a healthy competition. 2 top sales managers cannot not compete at all. At the same time, we always shared presentation materials with each other. If one of us got a good deal with a client in a particular area, for example, real estate, he would give the other one a presentation that was guaranteed to sell our services to other clients in that segment. We compiled the materials ourselves, each of us had our own tricks. Someone put a lot of photos of cases in the presentation, someone, data on 7 Excel sheets, so that the client could see the complexity of areas. Oleg set the general vector for us, and then each of us worked as we saw fit. There was no unified presentation of the agency, no set template. Plus we used each other's cases in front of clients. Do you know that we work with this and this? And we could say on occasion that most clients do it like this. This helped to attract the customer at the expense of expertise. He understood that we would sell him not just advertising, but a complex idea, complex placement, and so on. Alexei Galkin. I was always drawn to sales on big budgets. I wanted to work with tens and even hundreds of millions, namely, with television advertising. This direction in the Medor agency was not very well developed at that time, so I continued my professional path in other companies. But, you know what? It is unlikely that I would have landed a serious position in a strong company if it weren't for the skills I gained working at Medor. Big budgets, big clients, lots of telco, all of that came into my life. But with it came increased responsibility, which required my full commitment. And, coping with all the tasks, I always remembered Medor with a kind word, because it was there that I developed as a professional. For example, I learned how to sell properly. And when I found myself in another company, I quickly realized that this was a skill that would not be lost anywhere. But if I did not know how to sell, i.e. to make persistent calls, to get on the phone, to get to the tops, to close in payment, I would not have been able to get the position of marketing director in a very large jewelry company. And that is exactly the job I have at the time of writing this book. So thanks to Oleg Krutko and, of course, to all my former colleagues at Medor, without you everything would have turned out differently. Some people leave after working for us and go on a free voyage. And some stay with us for a long time. One of those who successfully coped with the task of selling right at the interview and eventually became an old-timer in the company was Alexander Gladkov, as it turned out, an excellent salesman and a future, production hit man. He is one of those people on whose talent and diligence our agency is based. Alexander Gladkov, an employee of Medor since 2008. He started as an account manager and grew to business partner and project manager of Idea Advertising Agency, part of Medor Group of Companies. I remember the date exactly, April 29th, 2 days before the May holidays. I then came to the position of sales manager. I was interested in working with incoming calls. I know how to communicate with a client who initially needs something from me. But when it is the other way around, it is not always easy to get through to a person. Then Oleg Olegovich had an interesting structure for accepting people after an interview. He always promised to call back, but never called anyone, and, as it turned out later, just waited for people to call him. In principle, it makes sense, a sales manager should be able to be persistent. And so it turned out in my case. I did not wait and called him myself 3 days later. I asked him what was going on, and he just threw a phrase, "Go to work." So I did. He is still on the job. If we talk about Oleg Krutko, I would say that he is lucky. Probably, this is a trait of a successful businessman, to catch a favorable moment, to pull the right string. His idea with the masks is an example of real flair, more about that episode in the next chapters. At the same time, he listens to the opinion of others. That is, the principle of, "I'm the boss, you're a fool." This is not about Medor. Oleg in any stressful situation, even if time is running out, all thoroughly studied, understand, and only then make a decision. So I never doubt that his opinion is balanced. Yes, it was probably not without luck. Back then, our company was still green, little known to anyone. The office was located in the middle of nowhere, but we always set high requirements for our employees. And we managed to find smart specialists. Plus, of course, the market itself favored us. Thanks to this, only the strongest specialists were hired. But still, no matter how talented and efficient our managers were, we could not do without the right technology of working with clients. That's why the following rule was invented: we don't sell to the client what he asks for. Sounds strange, doesn't it? Let me explain. Usually, when a company asks for advertising, the first thing we do is to find out the goal, the vision. And most often we hear in response something like, "I want a video, like the juice, my family, remember that?" That is, the customer usually chooses the advertising that he likes personally, or his wife, mother-in-law, other experts whom he has heard. But often a person forgets all about the request of his target audience. Since the client, quite often not a typical consumer of the product that produces, his point of view in this matter is not so important. The main thing is the quantity and quality of requests that will come to the customer after we launch an advertising campaign. That is why we always position our agency as professionals who will prepare such an advertising proposal that will provide the company with many applications. Vladimir Sakovsky. It was really difficult to convince clients that they needed something different from what they were asking for in order to achieve the results they wanted. And even over the phone, the bulk of the negotiations took place remotely. First of all, and secondly, the age limit of our advertisers was often 40 plus, as you already know. So they would pick up the phone and hear the young voice of a 19-year-old boy talking about different placement formats. You can understand, the degree of trust in me was not very high, to put it mildly. On top of that, we were calling 30 to 40 clients in a day. If you think that's not very many, let me clarify that we had to talk to each of them 3 or 4 times. So, for example, I call a potential customer, find out the details, and name the final price. The client suddenly says that he needs to think about it, he saw the same offer somewhere, but $15 cheaper. I urgently call the newspaper, haggle with them, ask to lower the price, again call the client with a new offer, and so on in a circle. Then you still need to make sure that the ad came out on time, in the right section. Be sure to call the client before renewal, to ask if he did not call someone from the competition, did not offer other conditions. Such is the eternal movement. Since then, of course, we have grown a lot. High-risk methods of advertising have been abandoned. But some things have remained the same. We teach our recruits to make each commercial proposal as if they were making a decision related to their own business. A good manager analyzes how our agency's price level compares to the competition and what quality of service we provide. It is important to put yourself in the client's shoes, and before each transaction ask yourself, if it was my business and I had only $1,500 in my account, where would I invest it? What quality of service would I want for that money? And when you are able to take care of the customer the way you would like to be taken care of, customers will come back to you for your product or service, again and again. Millions under the tree. We didn't keep any financial records at that time. Money came in, we kept it in a bag or a nightstand. Can you imagine? The cash was just lying around by itself, we didn't even count it. Of course, you can't do that. But now it's clear, and in that rock and roll era you could just wave your hand, we have money, and that's fine. And exactly how much is another matter. New Year's Eve, December 31st, 2008, 8 o'clock in the evening, all employees are at work. We work as in a normal day. A client calls and asks for advertising their company in elevators across Russia. He needed an application, that is, printing on self-adhesive film. We began to discuss the details and calculated the cost of the deal. It turned out to be $1,860,000. The biggest order ever. Vladimir Sakovsky. From the very first month we had a special type of service, advertising in elevators, which for 5 years or more was one of the most marginal areas of the company, despite its simplicity. However, the advertisers themselves are still a contingent. There were different people among them, but rarely when promising, conscious guys came to this position. Mostly they were reoriented promoters or newspaper distributors, and sometimes even just alcoholics who needed to urgently earn money for a hangover. So, when we took this huge order, we realized that our small team simply cannot cope. We need at least an office manager or project realizer, that is, a person who will be responsible for communicating with stickers, with distributors. And for printing the cards, and on each of them we marked a zone for each person who would go to put stickers or distribute promotional materials. We also realized that if for micro projects on 500, 1,000 elevators we had enough 3 or 4 stickers, then for a campaign where we paste 60 or 80,000 elevators throughout Moscow, we need a whole guard. And a separate person who would do nothing but print maps for it. As a result, we took everything at once, a bigger office, several new managers, and a secretary, aka the head of distribution, to do all these things, printing maps, communicating with stickers. A lot of strangers started coming to the office for stickers. We were excited. Here it is, a big business, a long-awaited powerful start. We began to work at double speed. We served this large client plus other small and medium-sized clients in parallel. In addition, our own incoming advertising was constantly working. We did not turn it off, for fear of missing some other large order. Things were constantly increasing, we couldn't cope and hired new employees. That's how we started to grow horizontally. There were a lot of orders, but we spent most of our time on this, the biggest one, which, by the way, caused us a lot of difficulties, especially in the regions. When local contractors heard that Moscow was calling, the price immediately became 3 times higher than it should have been. And we had to agree, because sometimes there were simply no other options, i.e. other organizations doing the same thing. In some cities we printed and glued more expensive than in the capital. There were cases when our regional partners had not tried to glue advertising in elevators before. That is, they called with trivial questions: how to glue, flat or on the side? How to open the elevator? By the way, yes, and how to open it? You might be wondering. In Moscow, we cooperated with 2 large companies that distributed free newspapers in millions of copies. They were the ones who bought the door codes from the letter carriers. Although in some neighborhoods we even had master keys, a magic pill that fits either all the entrances in the neighborhood or the doors of a certain manufacturer. In addition, we then acquired a whole Excel file, thousands of 30 lines, where the codes of entrances were collected. Although some distributors simply waited at the entrance, when the resident came out, or penetrated in other clever ways. There were some guys with years of experience among these peddlers. They could spread newspapers through the boxes faster than cowboys in westerns could draw revolvers and shoot. I saw it with my own eyes when I delivered some of the distributors to the place and at the same time supervised how they worked. The daily income of such skillful workers could reach $150 on a large order. And others who took the job, but did not know anything and did not want to learn, received $10 or so. Plus, there was a lot of turnover, but not only because of this. Someone, say, was detained by the police, someone was beaten by a concierge or a representative of the HOA. And there were brazen people who just threw out the circulation, so as not to strain, and then came and demanded money, and even lied that the report was left in other jeans, got with them in the washing machine, got wet, etc. In general, if you work with a large number of people, the probability of a hiring mistake increases several times. Because in any segment of professional and decent people, as practice shows, less than half. I anticipate a new question: how do you check whether a person has put up stickers or thrown them in the trash? We have introduced the rule of 100% photo reporting. He did it, he took it off, and then showed us the photos. Simple. In those years, not really. The cameras in cell phones were so bad back then, sometimes you couldn't understand what was in the photo at all. So we equipped the peddlers with cameras, if they didn't have their own, and scanned their passports. But this did not stop some people. They simply threw away the print run and went to a pawn shop with the camera. In short, there was a risk. There is always a risk, you can't do your job without it. We just learned to put possible financial losses into the cost of subsequent work. That's the secret. Yes, we then stopped the advertising that was providing new clients in order not to be distracted by other clients and to fulfill a large order. We worked out a plan. Our employees would travel to the largest cities where the advertising campaign was to be implemented, to personally supervise the pasting. We refused to place in small towns almost immediately. It was very time-consuming, so we were afraid of letting the client down. So, each of our employees had 7 cities. Sounds realizable, although not easy. We continue to count: printing of advertising materials, their logistics, payment to workers who were to be engaged in pasting, the cost of travel for our team. We judiciously assessed our forces and realized that we would not be able to fulfill the plan set by the client in full, there would not be enough capacity. So I honestly told the customer, "I'm sorry, the amount of the deal is certainly attractive, but we can't afford you yet. We will only be able to realize half of it." Do you think that executors often refuse such large deals? I'm sure they don't, it's just that we were honest, as it is, so it is. I think this is what bought the client and he agreed to our terms. So, after a month of negotiations, we issued a new invoice, for about $800,000, the net profit from the project came to $430,000. The amount is still weighty, including by today's standards. And imagine, it evaporated in 3 months. Do you think I bought myself anything with that money, maybe a Porsche, or a Rolex watch? No. I can't tell you exactly where it went, but one thing is clear, it went into business. We didn't do any accounting, remember? We were given some invoices, we paid them without even checking. But, again, we gained valuable experience, and Medor made a new rule: do not rashly take on deals that we know we cannot realize, no matter how much gold the customers offer. And on top of that, yes, start controlling finances clearly. Goodbye, money. By 2008, the Idea brand, organized by myself and Ilya Akhmedov, united 3 legal entities. They were Medor LLC, yes, I still used my favorite name, Idea, Ilya was the owner, and RPK, Advertising and Production Company, registered to me. As time went on, Ilya emphasized development. He said that we needed space for growth, more air. The staff was still growing rapidly, secretaries, couriers, managers of all stripes. So we moved to a new, larger office every 1.5 to 2 months. At first within the Voikovskaya station, we moved from an 18-meter room to a 25-meter one, and from it to a 50-meter one. We didn't have time to settle in yet, soon we were already located on 90 meters. Maxim Gavrilyuk, an employee of Medor in 2008 to 2009, is currently co-founder and CEO of Lighthouse, www.donpilafon.ru, an online store of lighting products. I joined the company during that very period. Through Headhunter, I think. I went through a standard interview and worked as an advertising sales manager. Initially I had an interview with an HR specialist, and he assigned me to the sales department for incoming clients with Vladimir Sokovsky. The latter was on vacation, and by the time he returned I had already been working in his department for a week. We got to know each other, talked, and, a month later he admitted that he would not have taken me to his department if he had received me personally at that time. That's funny. As is the fact that we ended up becoming friends and still keep in touch years later. Even now that I no longer work at Medor, for the first 3 months, in addition to a bonus for deals, I was paid a minimum salary. Everyone understood that I was a new person, without experience and established clients. Although it was not difficult to find them, as I worked in the department on incoming appeals. Of course, I had help. Mostly from Vladimir, my direct supervisor. Oleg could also give advice if I needed it. In general, people in the agency perceived each other as members of the same team. Did someone need help? We are colleagues, we are doing the same thing. I have worked at Medor for about a year, but I am still in touch with Oleg and the rest of my former colleagues. I also participated a little in the book about the company. Now, when the book is being written, I am co-founder and head of the Lighthouse company, and we have a website called donpilafon.ru. We sell decorative lighting, chandeliers, lamps, etc. Our main segment is the B2C market. We partially work on the B2B market, with designers, the completion of objects, and so on. The second co-founder of the company is Andrei Sidorov. We have been friends since high school, and during our lives we have occasionally crossed paths at work, including at Medor. Later we met people who owned a network of retail stores of lighting fixtures, and together with them began to sell these products. We focused on selling goods in offline outlets, and by that time we had managed to open 4 stores, while also developing the online direction. This went on until my partners and I stopped understanding each other and eventually came up with the idea of splitting up. First, Andre and I took over the online store, then we gave up selling goods from China, and finally we handed over the offline stores to our partners, giving up our own offline outlets, which coincided with the start of the pandemic. I note that working in online retail these days is different from what it was like 10 years ago, when we were just starting out. Back then, all you needed was desire, internet skills and trading skills. Now you need strong expertise in the product category where you want to develop. Competition on the internet is very high, and the mere fact of having an online store does not guarantee sales. Without a good base in the product category to do it is difficult. By the way, I can boast that we are more competent in the field of e-commerce than Medor, because we are closely involved in this area. But in general, we still have a lot to learn from our former colleagues in the field of branding. I am very grateful to the experience of working at Medor, where I learned communication and business skills, which in the future allowed me to develop in my own way. Looking at Oleg Olegovich and my colleagues, I learned to take risks, to try new niches, to test quickly and try things out immediately. Let others procrastinate and nurture different ideas for half a year, you just have to take it and do it, with minimal cost and effort. When the concept of MVP, minimum viable product, a prototype that is shown to investors, did not yet exist on the Russian market, Oleg Olegovich was already practicing this approach. So if you have decided on the niche in which you want to develop, feel free to recruit a team and invest money in time. So, finally, we rented a 150-meter office at the Akademikskaya metro station, which we thought was huge, in terms of rent, among other things. It was there that the economic crisis of 2008 to 2009 caught up with us. Let's go back to 2007, when Ilya brought a client to Moscow Pledge Bank, yes, the very same one. They immediately set a condition: you guys are young, the firm is unknown, open a current account with our bank, and we will order an advertising campaign from you in return. That is, the bank actually paid us for advertising, but we did not see this money in person. They transferred the payment to our account, which was in their bank. Clever, huh? Of course, we agreed, you can't miss out on a big customer. We didn't know what risk mitigation was, and we didn't know that capital should be spread over several banks. What to take from people who had recently kept all the company's profits in cash in the office. Soon after we opened an account there, things went badly for Moscow Pledge Bank, and in early 2009 the central bank revoked its license. I wouldn't wish anyone to find themselves in a similar situation. You have to pay for office rent and salaries for employees. And the funds for business expenses and paying bills were frozen in the bank that went bankrupt. We still had some cash in the office only because many clients at the time were paying in cash. But the reserves were melting like snow in late March. One day I received a call from an unknown number from someone offering to take our money out of the bank. But, of course, not for nothing, he asked for 16% of the amount stored there. I, as a man of principle, refused. Why should we give our hard-earned money to some tricksters? Some time later they called again and again. They offered a deal, but for 18% of the amount, then for 21%, but I did not fall for this trick. Honestly, now I would agree even to a much higher percentage of commission, because I know how this story ended. But then I sincerely believed in justice, and every day I went to the bank branch and withdrew $3,000 from 3 checkbooks. Applications had to be rewritten 10 times, the comma was wrong, the signature was not similar. I spent 3 hours in line, in the air and in the pressure. Poor people like us were trying to withdraw at least 99,990 rubles. This was the amount of money the bank gave out per legal entity per working day. All in all, I managed to get only $30,000 out of the bank, that's all. And the rest of the money, about 1.5 million rubles of my investment and another 1 million from Ilya, we gave to bankrupt former clients. Yes, we once went to a meeting of the creditors of the Moscow Pledge Bank. The huge hall was packed with tons of people. The main creditor was Mozabilgaz, which had hundreds of millions of dollars outstanding, and our votes with claims for less than $100,000 carried no weight. So we decided not to go to any more meetings, it was all useless. To be fair, after 7 or 8 years, we still got a little over $2,000 out of our missing money, about 2% of the lost amount. But that is definitely the end of it. Family or business. If you are the head of a fast-growing business, changing office space like gloves, hiring new employees, respectively, then you make a lot of money, you will say. And you'd be wrong. At that time, my wife and I with a small child still lived in a rented one-room apartment. I rode my bicycle to work, it took me an hour and a half one way. Like any ordinary family at that time, we kept our money in the closet, on the top shelf. As soon as I found out that the bank, where all the funds for business development were kept, had lost its license, I rushed to withdraw everything I had set aside to buy an apartment. Something like $60,000, it was kept in another bank. I moved that money to a more secure place than a bank, a shelf in my clothes closet. From there I slowly took money for business development, until a couple of months later I found out that there was only $150 left. This last money I also invested in the business, every cent. My spouse was stressing out, and I carried on believing that the situation was temporary and was about to be resolved. However, at times, I was also uncomfortable. In fact, the business, which we had built so hard, investing time, money and effort in it, was collapsing before our eyes. It looked like we were going to have to close the business. Again, unwilling to put up with it, I continued to play it safe, and didn't even reduce operating costs. We didn't lay off a single employee, which is 15 of mine and 10 more of Ilya's. We managed to keep the office, too. We, arrogant young men without any economic education, just didn't realize that in the current situation we needed to urgently cut costs. At some point we were lucky, we received payment for the projects from Euroset and Beeline, our biggest clients at the time. He who is lucky, we got out, but then something equally serious began.